There's this really interesting historical pattern, isn't there? For an idea or maybe a message to properly spread, it can't just reach individuals here and there.
Right. It needs more than that.
Yeah, it needs
Yeah.
to create these hubs, these centers it can radiate out from. Like, think about St. Paul establishing churches way back when. They weren't just meetings.
No, they were launching pads, really, designed for growth.
Exactly. So the big question is, what does that kind of rapid radiating growth look like now in America today?
It's a critical question because the methods we often use here, well, they might be good at gathering folks to one spot, but they aren't always set up for that kind of exponential, decentralized spread.
Precisely. And that is exactly what this deep dive is all about today. We're looking closely at a specific approach outlined in a document we've got here. 008 No Place Left in America.pdf.
Ah, yes.
It explores how these principles of rapid multiplication, the kind you often hear about overseas, in really challenging places.
Yeah, where resources are scarce or there's external pressure.
Right. How those are being intentionally applied and adapted right here in the U.S.
Yes, it's a deep dive into how people are taking lessons learned in, say, Asia or Africa and asking, okay, can this actually work here? With all the complexities and different cultural stuff we have in America.
Our mission, then, is to unpack the experiences of people mentioned in this doc, folks like Jeff Sundell, Gary Stump, Fred and Melissa Campbell, Chuck Wood. People who are really challenging the traditional assumptions about how things should be done. And they're seeing some, surprising results by focusing hard on simple, reproducible ways to make and multiply disciples and the groups they form.
Simple and reproducible seem to be the key words there.
Totally. We want to understand what they're actually doing, boots on the ground. What are they learning? And maybe what does success even mean in this context? Because as you'll see, it's measured very, very differently.
Absolutely. It's like a world away from counting heads and pews or the size of the building or the budget. The whole focus shifts to reproduction, multiplication.
Right. So get ready. We're going to look at how this completely different way of thinking about spreading a message, building community, how it's playing out in real places, South Carolina, Indiana, Texas, other cities across the U.S. Let's get into this document and these stories.
Okay, so the document really kicks off by setting the scene with Jeff Sundell. His background is pretty important here. He'd spent about a decade pioneering these multiplication movements in really tough places, like northern India and Nepal.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, focused on equipping thousands of local believers to immediately share their faith and start simple, reproducible groups. Churches, basically. Then, 2009, he moves back to the U.S.
And the document paints this picture of, culture shock almost.
You could say that.
After just 3 weeks sitting in a traditional church service, he apparently felt, I can't do this anymore. He realized he had to apply the same principles that worked overseas, which meant going out, finding people far from the usual church structures, getting into homes, and immediately training new disciples to reproduce to form new simple groups right away.
What's really striking is how he saw the core principles as directly transferable, despite the context change. The document talks about him tagging along with 3 guys he was training, Neil, Dean, and Clint, down in Chesney, South Carolina.
Okay.
Their goal is simple: find persons of peace. People or households who are open, receptive.
And how did they do that? Not with a big program, I guess.
No, not at all. It was relational, practical. They walked neighborhoods, prayed for connections, and asked people this simple, needs-focused miracle question.
Which was?
If God could do a miracle in your life right now, what would it be?
Ah, interesting. Straight to the point, but personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it led to real connections.
And wasn't that story about raking leaves? That really stuck with me.
Yes, that perfectly illustrates it. They met Suzanne, just arrived, fleeing violence, injured leg.
Rough situation.
Very. They prayed for her, shared their stories, a bit about the gospel, invited her to a Bible study starting nearby at a guy named Johnny's house. They'd only just met Johnny, too, after praying for his back pain on his porch.
So it's all happening very organically.
Totally. But the key part, they didn't just give the invite and leave. They saw Suzanne struggling to rake leaves with her bad leg.
And they just grabbed the rake and helped.
Yep. That practical act of service, flowing right out of the prayer and the conversation, that was the entry point. It wasn't about dragging someone to a building. It was meeting a need right there and then inviting them into discovery.
Makes sense.
The doc also mentions them at a local restaurant, connecting with Sally, their waitress. Prayed for her needs, found out she was moving the next day and stressed about it, so they offered to help her pack and move. just like that.
Wow.
Wow.
So talk about being interruptible and just present.
Right. So in one morning, 5 houses visited, 4 people prayed for, 2 heard the gospel, a Bible study launched, help offered for a move.
Those are simple relational acts, but they open the door, don't they, for deeper connection?
Absolutely. And the document then mentions this community of practice Jeff hosted, a place for practitioners to share, learn, figure out problems together.
And they based it on the Book of Acts, seeing that early church context as relevant.
Yes, exactly. And the questions they used for like assessment and planning are super revealing about this whole approach they asked. 1, what's God doing? 2, where are you stuck?
Okay.
3, what 2 action plans would move you toward generational growth? Notice that emphasis.
Generational growth.
Right.
Not just adding numbers.
And 4, how can we pray? The focus is squarely on multiplication, breaking through barriers to reproduction.
That focus on generational growth is huge. It really seems to be a core theme. Which brings us, I think, to Gary Stump in Fishers, Indiana. His story is powerful because he came from such a different background, right? Very traditional, successful ministry.
Oh, absolutely. A massive contrast. He was a businessman that became a pastor after his wife tragically passed away.
Yeah.
Led a struggling church, saw it grow, planted another fast-growing one, merged them.
Yeah.
Ended up with like 1,500 people attending.
Baptized 1,000 people over 10 years, tons of staff, big building projects, capital campaigns.
Yeah. I mean, by any conventional measure, that's enormous success.
Yeah.
Cost something like $20 million, the document says.
But then, what happened?
Well, after 2 decades of that, Gary started asking himself some hard questions. Like, was he truly making disciples or mainly just gathering a big crowd?
Oof. That's a tough question to ask yourself after that kind of run.
Definitely. Then he read a book that pops up a lot in these circles, T4T, Discipleship Re-Revolution. It's about a huge multiplication movement in East Asia. He said just the first chapter wrecked him.
Wrecked him. How so?
Okay, this part is really key to understanding the shift. He compared his results, that 1,000 baptisms over a decade, with all the resources and effort,
Yeah.
to the leader in that book, Ying Kai, who over a similar period with far fewer resources, often in a hostile setting, had seen something like 158,000 simple churches planted.
Whoa.
And 1.7 million new believers baptized.
Okay, that's a staggering difference.
It hit him hard. Gary realized his approach, even though successful by normal standards, just wasn't going to cut it for reaching the world. Only a multiplying movement could do that. He came to this conclusion, basically, that he was too old to play church. He had to let go of the obsession with the ABCs.
The ABC.
Attendance, buildings, and cash.
Ah, the usual metrics.
The usual metrics. He realized the limitations of addition, simple addition, versus the sheer power of multiplication. That was the turning point.
So what did he do? Did he just stop everything?
He consciously shifted focus. Moved away from the big Sunday service being the absolute center of everything. He saw how complex and resource-hungry it had become. His new focus.
Keep it simple.
Concentrate only on making disciples in a way that could actually reproduce and transform the community around him.
Okay.
He planted a new church, Onward Church, with one single goal. Multiply disciples who immediately make disciples. Ruthlessly focused on effectiveness and, bringing people to faith, discipling them, and getting those new disciples to immediately start the cycle again.
And crucially, he realized something else, didn't he? About his previous ministry.
Yes. He realized that while he'd encouraged and challenged people towards making disciples...
Like, preached about it.
Yeah, exactly. He'd never actually taught them how to do it. Not in a simple, easy-to-pass-on kind of way.
So that's what he started doing?
Yep. Early 2012, opened his basement, started training anyone interested in this T4T method he'd read about. Trained about 200 people by the middle of that year.
And who were the first ones to really grab onto it?
This is fascinating, high school students. They were some of the earliest adopters, the first leaders.
Really? Teenagers?
Yeah. Soon you had 12-year-olds sharing their personal stories, sharing God's story, the gospel, and leading these things called Discovery Bible Studies, or DBS.
Discovery Bible Studies, what makes them different?
They're key to this model. Highly participatory, not lecture-based, focused on people discovering truth for themselves, directly from the Bible passage. And this is vital-oriented towards immediate obedience and sharing what they learned.
So practical applications built right in.
Absolutely. They even have accountability questions, like, how did you obey what we learned last time? And how did you fish for new disciples this week?
Wow, okay. Direct. So did it work? Did this approach actually lead to multiplication?
The results seem pretty dramatic. By the end of 2013, just over a year after starting the training,
Yeah.
they had 200 groups meeting out in the community, involving about 1,000 people. And get this, half of those 1,000 weren't Christians when they first joined a group.
Half. That's incredible. So it was reaching completely new people.
Exactly. And they track generational growth, remember?
Right. A group starts a group that's second gen.
And that second gen starts another, that's third gen, and so on. By 2014, Gary was seeing fifth and sixth generation groups forming.
Fifth and sixth generation. That is multiplication. You can't get there by just adding people to one place.
Precisely. It underscores that shift in metrics. Success is tracked by generations of reproduction. The document even notes it gets hard to keep accurate track beyond the fourth generation.
Which, ironically, is a good sign, right?
It's a great sign. It means disciple-making and group starting is happening organically, decentrally, without needing constant oversight from the center.
So how do they equip people so quickly?
Ultra-simple methods. Learn to share your personal story. Learn to share God's story using maybe just a few key verses. Learn how to lead a DBS. That's kind of the core toolkit.
Okay.
So any disciple is equipped to lead someone to faith, baptize them anywhere, pool, bathtub, lake, whatever, and teach them the basics of following Jesus and, crucially, fishing for others. And any disciple can start and lead a new group that functions like a simple, healthy church gathering.
There was that story about Jerry, the guy who said he was too shy.
Oh, yeah. Powerful example. He initially said, "No way, I'm too withdrawn, too scared to share my faith, only here because I was invited."
But then,
Through the training, the simple process, he later led his own grandson to Christ and baptized him himself.
amazing. And Ron, the guy in the same small group for 10 years.
Right. After Gary's training, he launches 4 new groups, and one of those has reproduced out to the 6th generation.
See, that highlights it, doesn't it? It's not about finding super outgoing, experienced people. It's about giving everyone simple, reproducible tools they can actually use.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Gary still has Sunday services, apparently, but they're not the main engine anymore, not the primary measure. His core focus is getting the gospel out through equipped people scattered everywhere, not just drawing people in.
And he's still learning, facing challenges.
Oh, yeah. Spiritual opposition, he mentions. But the biggest challenge, training workers fast enough to keep up with the multiplication already happening.
Good problem to have, I guess.
You could say that. His vision is huge. Now seeing movement sweep Indianapolis, spark multiplication elsewhere, even globally, he's really operating as a movement pioneer in the U.S.
That idea, empowering individuals instead of relying only on central programs, that leads us to Fred and Melissa Campbell in Austin, Texas.
Right. Another fascinating story. They started using their business intentionally for ministry, sharing faith with employees, customers, connecting people to churches.
Which sounds good.
It was good. But, like Gary Stump, they eventually hit a point where they felt stuck. They weren't seeing the reproduction, the multiplication they really longed for, led them to pray this really intense prayer, "God, give us Austin or we die."
Wow. Okay, so how did they find those receptive people, those houses of peace? Their method was pretty down to earth, right?
Incredibly practical. Saturday mornings, they'd go into specific neighborhoods offering free breakfast burritos.
Breakfast burritos, seriously?
Yep. Just saying, we care about you.
Yeah.
That simple act of generosity, genuine interest, it just opened doors. Started conversations with folks they'd never meet otherwise. Then they asked that same miracle question we heard earlier.
If God could do a miracle.
Right. And pray for people's needs right there.
And the follow-up was important, too.
Crucial. People who welcomed that first chat and prayer were often open to a second visit, this time in their own living room. Much more comfortable, familiar setting. There, Fred and Melissa would share a Bible story. The doc mentions the woman weeping at Jesus' feet as an example. Then they'd ask the host to retell the story themselves, just to make sure they got it. Then discuss what it meant. After that, they'd share their own story, and then God's story, the gospel, using a simple Bible passage.
And how did people respond to that direct approach in their homes?
They used really simple, direct questions. Does this make sense? And is there any reason you wouldn't want God's gift of forgiveness? And the document says they found a surprisingly high positive response rate, like 80% among those who welcomed that return visit.
80%. Wow.
Yeah, people either accepted Christ right then or were eager to hear another story. And if someone became a believer, bam, immediate follow-up. Foundational discipleship, simple curriculum on the 7 commands of Christ, teaching obedience from day one.
So they were seeing people come to faith, getting them grounded.
Yeah.
But still not the multiplication.
Not initially, not the rapid kind they prayed for. That changed when they connected with Jeff Sundell in early 2013.
Ah, Sundell again.
Yep. The document says he helped fill in the missing pieces, specifically how to multiply, how to mobilize their trainees to be disciple makers who reproduce. They essentially swapped their effective evangelism strategy for a full-on discipleship movement strategy.
And did that make a difference?
Almost immediately.
Yeah.
They started mapping Austin, sending out teams with these updated methods. In just 60 days, 2 months, they identified 400 houses of peace,
Yeah.
receptive people or families.
400 in 2 months.
Yeah, and formed over 60 new Discovery Bible study groups in those homes. By the end of that year, December 2013, over 100 groups meeting across Austin.
That's incredible growth. There was that story, too, about the Iranian man.
Amazing story. Just arrived in the U.S., has a dream someone will knock on his door. Next day, Fred and a local pastor show up.
Unbelievable.
Total house of peace moment. And his home then became a base for reaching his whole community.
And their practical approach continued even after groups formed, right? Fixing a fence.
Yes. Shows the community focus. They took a local pastor with them to one housing development. Saw like 60 people come to faith.
60 people.
The pastor suggested planting a church right there, so they did. The simple church. And was one of the first things this new church does. Pools their money to fix a fallen fence that was dangerous for kids. That tangible act of care really impressed the complex management. Showed they were about more than just talk.
That makes a difference. So their group meetings reflected these principles, too.
Absolutely. Worship, prayer, yes, but also that direct accountability. Did you obey last week's lesson? Did you fish for new disciples? Now they're intentionally training others to reach all sorts of diverse communities across Austin, finding those houses of peace everywhere, still seeing that high response rate.
And partnering with traditional churches, too.
Yeah, by 2014, setting out monthly teams with them, spreading this vision for reaching no place left in Austin and hopefully beyond. Shows it can work alongside existing structures sometimes.
Okay, these stories really build on each other. The final main example is Chuck Wood in San Antonio. Different background again.
Yeah, 30 years specifically in disciple-making, even national leadership with the Navigators. Very experienced.
So he probably had it all figured out.
Well, you'd think. But reading another book, Movements That Changed the World, sent him on this 3-year personal journey of reevaluation. Months just in the Bible, praying, desperate to see the kind of multiplication in the U.S. that he knew was possible from Scripture and overseas reports. He really refocused on trying to join God where God was already working.
So he moved to San Antonio with his wife, Deb. But things didn't take off right away, even with all that experience.
Nope. They weren't seeing the multiplication they wanted. New believers just weren't passing on their faith effectively. And the feedback they got was telling. People felt the methods they were being taught were too hard, too complicated, needed too much background knowledge.
Ah, complexity again. The enemy of reproduction.
Exactly. Simple is essential for multiplication. That's a constant theme here.
So what was his turning point? Similar to Gary Stump's.
Very similar. December 2012, he reads T4T by Steve Smith and Ying Kai, same book that impacted Gary. The document says he heard this clear inner voice, humble yourself and do this.
Wow. Despite his decades of experience, hundreds of books read.
He recognized this wasn't just another technique. He felt God telling him to adopt this specific, simple, reproducible way.
Humility seems key there, too.
Definitely. Then the next part of the book asks, what would it take? And for Chuck, that immediately became personal. What would it take to reach this city, San Antonio? That sparked the 2020 by 2020 vision.
Which was?
2020 disciple-making groups, or simple churches, in San Antonio by the year 2020. He apparently thought it sounded a bit cheesy at first. But it was a specific, measurable multiplication goal he couldn't shake.
And applying these simple T4T methods, did it work for him?
Immediately. A new believer he trained using the simple process started a group. It grew from 5 people to 35 in just 3 weeks.
35 in 3 weeks.
Yeah, and led several friends and family to faith. New disciples right out of the gate started leading Discovery Bible studies for their own networks. Chuck finally had a method that was actually reproducing fast.
So the simplicity unlocked it.
It seems so. Within a year of adopting this, his first 2 training groups had multiplied to 17 groups across the city. By 2014, they were seeing 3rd-generation groups, even 4th-generation believers coming to faith within those multiplying streams.
4th-generation believers.
Yes.
Amazing. And his vision is citywide, too, partnering with others.
Yes, the whole city. And he's partnering with traditional churches, church planters, training them in these simple, reproducible methods, focusing on how Jesus himself did it, entering communities, sharing, making disciples, building community, reproducing workers.
And his personal story has another layer too, doesn't it? A major health challenge.
Incredibly inspiring, yeah. The document notes he was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
Oh, wow.
Much of his training now has to be done via video conference. But his influence is still multiplying, even globally. Trainees from 6 different countries connected with him have planted dozens of simple churches, seeing multiple generations of growth. He's still pushing that no place left vision for San Antonio and beyond, despite everything.
That's quite something, dedication.
Truly. And all these stories, South Carolina, Indiana, Texas, they circle back to Jeff Sundell's bigger picture, that no place left vision specifically for America. The document mentions his 55-50 goal.
55-50.
To see this approach implemented in 50 majority-minority U.S. cities within 5 years, aiming for 50 fourth-generation trainers established in each of those cities.
Fourth-generation trainers, that's deep multiplication.
Exactly. And key to tracking it, as we've seen, isn't counting individuals or just first-gen churches. It's intentionally tracking those generational streams of simple church planting and disciple-making, specifically aiming for streams that hit at least the 4th generation of reproduction.
And were they seeing progress towards that goal back then, around 2014?
The document indicated yes. Trainers implementing this in 13 cities already. 4th-generation churches formed in 7 of those. 2nd and 3rd-gen groups multiplying in 14 other cities.
So it wasn't just isolated pockets, it was starting to spread as an intentional strategy.
Right. It demonstrates these aren't just flute success stories. They're part of a growing conscious effort to apply these reproducible multiplication principles right across the varied landscape of the U.S.
It really is a powerful picture of shifting the focus, moving beyond just adding people to something central.
To truly embracing multiplication, seeing that as the core measure of reaching a whole population.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to take in. Let's try and quickly recap the core insights, the main takeaways we've pulled from these stories in this document.
Sounds good.
First, there's that really clear, intentional shift away from focusing on, the traditional stuff, the ABCs, as Gary Stump called them.
Attendance, buildings, cash.
Right. Away from that. And towards prioritizing the multiplication, the reproduction of disciples in simple groups across generations.
And the absolute key to that multiplication seems to lie in using methods that are consistently simple and reproducible. So simple that anyone can do them, not just like the trained professionals or the super charismatic folks.
Right. Things like praying for people's needs as a way in, maybe using that miracle question.
Sharing your own story and God's story, but in really simple terms.
Leading those discovery Bible studies where people dig into the Bible themselves and are held accountable, not just to learn, but to obey and to share it.
Yeah, and intentionally looking for those houses of peace, those receptive people or families in all kinds of communities.
And maybe the most crucial bit, training everyone immediately. As soon as someone engages, you train them to reproduce these simple actions themselves.
Absolutely. Train the trainer right from the start.
And the little details we heard really make it stick, don't they?
They do.
Raking leaves, helping someone move, just practical service, offering breakfast burritos to start a chat.
Having Bible studies in living rooms, not necessarily church halls.
The fact that high schoolers, even 12-year-olds, could be trained to lead and share effectively.
Or individuals like Jerry, overcoming deep shyness because the method itself was simple enough.
Chuck's perseverance, training via video with ALS, tracking growth out to the 5th or 6th generation, finding receptive people in unexpected places, fixing that community fence.
All those tangible examples show these principles in action. They show that these movement ideas, which maybe we associate with faraway places,
Yeah, overseas mostly.
they can actually be adapted and applied right here. In the complex, diverse setting of the U.S. The key seems to be empowering ordinary people with simple, reproducible tools.
So thinking about all this, why does understanding this matter for you, listening right now? Well, regardless of the specific message or community you care about, this offers a really different way to think about how things grow, how change spreads.
It definitely challenges assumptions about what's truly essential, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not always the big budget or the complex program or the fancy building.
Maybe it's more about focusing on empowering individuals, giving them simple, reproducible actions they can take right where they are in their own lives.
And it shows how concentrating on equipping individuals to share and reproduce whatever the core message or practice is, how that can potentially lead to exponential growth. Creating this ripple effect that spreads so far, you might not even be able to track it all from one central point after a while, maybe after that fourth generation, like they found.
Think about that vision.
Right.
No place left being reached. What could that kind of thinking mean in any area where you want to see positive impacts spread widely?
What does no place left look like in your field or your community?
So building on Jeff Sundell's idea of tracking those generational streams, aiming for multiplication to reach no place left. Here's a final thought to consider. What if the real measure of effectiveness in whatever you're doing wasn't just about adding more people to something you control or manage centrally? What if, instead, it was about how well you empower individuals to create and reproduce positive impact, whether that's sharing knowledge or a skill, starting a community group, spreading a helpful message, empowering them to do that right in their own circles, leading to a kind of multiplication you might not even see directly beyond, say, that fourth generation?
It's a different way of thinking about influence and scale, isn't it?
It really is. So the question for you is, what kind of multiplication is needed to address the challenges you see or spread the good you care about in your community, your sphere of influence?
And maybe, drawing from these examples, what's one simple, reproducible step, however small, that you could take, or perhaps teach someone else to take, even this week, to start that process, to start empowering that kind of reproduction?